Welcome to Unravelling the Book of Revelation, Episode 7. Hello, I'm Bruce Telfer, and we are going to continue on our study of the battle for religious and political liberty. And this is part 4, and this will be our final segment in our introduction to the Book of Revelation. After we've finished this, we will start with the Book of Revelation itself. So in our study, we discovered that it's a fallacy to believe that these characters from ancient Athens were the founders of Western civilization, which many people believe, because it's obvious that they did not support democratic systems. They were anti-democratic. And the whole concept of Western civilization, as we believe it today, is all about democracy, humanitarianism, individual rights, etc. But Plato, who for our purposes is the most important of these philosophers, he advocated a sacral society. And the main points in his sacral society were, we have a pre-existent model, and that was Atlantis for him, and therefore we must go backwards and not forwards. We must find our inspiration and for everything that we do and believe based in the past, not in the future. The wise would rule over the ignorant many. Individuality was condemned by Plato. Everybody would be answerable to a superior in his system. No unauthorized private worship, and death for transgressors. Serious business. Well, the other main point that we need to review is the fact that many people believe that our religious and political freedoms came from the Reformation. We've talked about this in the past, but we're just reviewing. So here you have Zwingli and an unknown pastor from the Free Church. So that you have Magisterial Reformers, and they are the people who relied on the state to enforce their decrees, and they also demanded the death penalty for people who would not conform to their magisterial demands. They are called Magisterial Reformers because they relied on the magistrate to dictate terms to everybody. But you have the Free Church Reformers, and they are the people who took their inspiration directly from the Bible. They wanted to live their lives according to what they found the Bible to be true. So they were also anti-progressive, the Magisterial Reformers. They wanted to stay where Luther stayed when he died. All the Lutherans just stayed where Luther was, and all the Calvinists just stayed with Calvin after he passed away, etc. They were not people who delved into the Bible and wanted to go further. The Free Church Reformers did. So here we have a statement which is pointing out that the Free Church is the origin of our freedoms. The Protestant Reformation of the 16th century did not solve the problem of religious liberty. Intolerance and brute force, as represented by the sword, continued in the church. The full development of religious liberty is not to be found among the major churches of the Reformation, but the Free Church movement of the 16th and 17th centuries. And we can look upon the Anabaptists, for example, as being probably the most prominent Free Church members during the time of the Reformation. And the Magisterial Reformers used to drown them because they advocated adult baptism. And products of the Free Church that are in the world today are the Methodist Church, the Baptist Church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So, when the Free Church went to the New World Unfortunately, they took many of the ideas which were advocated by the magisterial churches with them. You see, when they founded, for example, the colony of Virginia, it was in the Constitution of Virginia, upon pain of the first folk to lose their provision. This is talking about church attendance. So if you were not going to church, upon pain for the first folk to lose their provision and the allowance for the whole week following, for the second to lose the said allowance and also be whipped, and for the third to suffer death. And these were free church people. These were people who wanted to follow the Bible, and they took these unbiblical ideas with them because that's what they understood, that's what they knew, that's what they came from, and they hadn't thrown it off yet. So here is the man that we need to look into as the person who brought religious liberty and out of that political liberty to America. Now, his name is Roger Williams, and if you've never heard of him, then he is the man, the most important man that you have never heard of, because people need to understand the contribution that this man has made to the American way of life, to the American Constitution, and to all our freedoms that we hold so, not so dearly in our hands anymore. We're giving them up readily for all sorts of unconstitutional demands. Anyway, so Roger Williams is relatively well known in America. They have a park named after him. They have a university park named after him. They have a statue of him outside the university. He was the first person in modern Christendom to establish civil governance on the doctrine of the liberty of conscience, the equality of opinions before the law. So that makes him an exceptional person. He saw what other people never saw. This is a little bio of his life. 11 years after the planting of the first colony, Roger Williams came to the New World. Like the early pilgrims, he came to enjoy religious freedom. But unlike them, he saw what so few in his time had yet seen, that this freedom was the inalienable right of all. Whatever might be their creed, he was an earnest seeker for truth, holding it impossible that all the light from God's word had yet been received. You see, this is the problem. People were willing to take the word of God, and they think they're going to live according to the principles and laws and will of God, but they haven't discovered everything that's in the Bible. And this is why Roger Williams is so important, because he has seen what other people have not seen. And this is what he wrote. This is a sample of what he wrote. God requireth not an uniformity of religion to be enacted and be forced in any civil state. That's the whole thing about a sacred society, uniformity. Everybody has to think the same and act the same. He was a rather unique character because his concept of religious and political rights included the rights of Native Americans, which made him a real radical. But he made friends with the Indians, and that served him well in his eventful life, which we will explain in a moment. You see, he got into trouble with the authorities in Boston and Massachusetts, and he had to flee. And he had to flee in the middle of the winter. So that was a death sentence, by the way. So making his way at last, after months of change and wandering, to the shores of Narragansett Bay, he there laid the foundations of the first state in modern times, that in the fullest sense recognized the right of religious freedom. The fundamental principle of Roger Williams' colony was that every man should have liberty to worship God according to the light of his own conscience. By the way, I forgot to mention, it was the Indians that saved him from... He went to the Indians and they took him in and looked after him until the winter was over. And that's when he went down to Narragansett Bay and he established the colony which is now known today as Rhode Island. So this is part of the Rhode Island Law Code, inspired, of course, by Roger Williams. Otherwise than this, what is herein forbidden, all men may walk as their conscience persuade them, every one in the name of God, and let the lambs of the Most High walk in this colony without molestation in the name of Jehovah their God forever and ever. In other words, whatever laws there are, that is binding and that is restricting. But if the law does not say anything about a certain topic, then you're free to do it. If the law says you can take if the law does not say you can take as many fish as you like out of the bay, then you can go and take as many fish as you want. So that's the principle that he established in his colony. Now, from the Great Controversy, his, meaning Roger Williams' little state, Rhode Island, became the asylum of the oppressed, and it increased and prospered until its foundation principles, civil and religious liberty, became the cornerstone of the American Republic. And I'm going to briefly explain that in a moment. But all of the great men, the founding fathers of the Republic of the United States of America, they all had this attitude. This is George Washington. Every man conducting himself as a good citizen and being accountable to God alone for his religious opinions ought to be protected in worshipping the deity according to the dictates of his own conscience. He also said this, the dictates of his own conscience, which is the foundation of religious liberty and political liberty. This is Thomas Jefferson. God hath created the mind free. All attempts to influence it by civil incapacitations tend only to beget habits of hypocrisy and are a departure from the plan of the Holy Author, who being Lord of both body and mind, yet chose not to propagate it by coercions on either, as was in his almighty power to do. In other words, he's saying God is all-powerful and he can force anybody to do anything he wants to, but he chose not to do that. And if God acts like that, then we ought to do the same. So these people put together the U.S. Constitutional Convention, the U.S. Constitution, and that was done by a convention in the year 1787. But Rhode Island did not ratify the Constitution because they objected that there was not sufficient laws protecting freedom of religion and other freedoms. And so they insisted on a Bill of Rights. This is Rhode Island's contribution to the American Constitution. They had the Constitution first, and then Rhode Island said, that's not enough. We want a Bill of Rights. So the First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, for the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievance. Now, that foundation document has been followed by many, many countries around the world. In 1987, on the Constitution's bicentennial, Time magazine calculated that of the 170 countries that exist today, more than 160 have written charters modeled directly or indirectly on the US version. So what we have here is a unique experiment, if you like, where people are governing themselves. They are setting up a political system which is modeled on the protection of individual rights, including religious and political. And this is unique in the history of the world. Not quite unique. I mean, the original democracy in Athens was a democratic attempt. But you see, this is a republic now. It's a republic. There's a big difference between a republic and a democracy. You see, a republic is governed by law, not by the mob. The law dictates how the government works, how society works. It dictates how people associate with one another. It dictates how the different branches of the government are actually built in as checks and balances, so that not one part of the government can actually override the other. So it's a very interesting document, and it's a unique document. That's why America is in the book of Revelation. That's why we have to go through all of this in order to understand the book of Revelation better. So, the establishment of liberty of conscience, which brought with it liberty of speech and of the press, was in the several states the fruit not of philosophy, but of the love of Protestantism for the open Bible. Notice what this statement says. It says, the establishment of liberty of conscience brought with it liberty of speech and of the press. The foundation principle of political and religious freedom is liberty of conscience, for people to think for themselves and to then act for themselves. And this is all about individual rights. And this is what makes America unique. Yes, many countries around the world copied America, but they were kind of forced to in many ways, because if they didn't copy what America was doing, the whole world would move to America. All freedom-loving people would move to America. So the other nations, in many instances, were kind of forced to adopt many of the American examples. Do you think they really wanted to do that? No, they didn't, and we will look into that in a moment. Now, firstly, I want to go back to the original Plymouth Colony. This is an idealized version of what the Plymouth Colony wanted to be. They wanted to live in harmony with the Indians, peace and harmony, and they wanted to live in peace and harmony with each other. But it never happened, and this is why. This is an account of what happened at the Plymouth Colony by the governor of the colony. So this is what he writes. The experience that was held in this common course and condition tried sundry years. They tried it for several years, and that amongst godly and sober men may well evince the vanity of that conceit of Plato's and other ancients, applauded by some of later times. So I want you to catch what he's saying here. They were trying to implement the philosophy of Plato and the other ancients, the other Greek philosophers. And this is the consequences of what happened. That the taking away of property and bringing in community into a commonwealth would make them happy and flourishing as if they were wiser than God. So in other words, they were trying to implement socialism in their new colony. They think that socialism is the way to go, and they can find certain biblical passages which might tend to support the idea of socialism. But if you try this, you destroy individuality, and individuality is actually more Christian than socialism. And we're going to look into that in a moment. For this community, so far as it was found to breed much confusion and discontent. So they're trying socialism. Everything is held in common, and it breeds confusion and discontent, and retards much employment. In other words, the people, they found that socialism retarded their work. People didn't want to work, and this is a basic human, what would you call it, impulse. That when you don't see the benefit personally for your work, then you don't really want to work. So anyway, and retard much employment that would have been to their benefit and comfort. So let's just go back for a second and look at this picture. Half the people in that colony after the first year died. And they died because they couldn't support themselves. Half of them perished. And the reason we're going to discover is because they tried to live a socialist type of existence. Okay, carrying on. For the young men that were most able and fit for labour and service did repine, that means complain, that they should spend their time and strength to work for other men's wives and children without any recompense. The strong or man of parts had no more in division of victuals and cloths than he that was weak and not able to do a quarter the other could, and this was thought an injustice. So that's the problem. People don't want to work when they see no benefit personally for their work. So they actually changed course completely. William Bradford, the governor, goes on to explain how they decided that in order to survive, and this is about survival, in order to survive, they had to give people private property. And the people could work on their private property and they would gain the benefit of their work. And this saved the colony. Seriously. Socialism failed, and individuality and private property saved the colony. This is what he goes on to explain. So, what we need to look at in this context about America is how the individual is always going to be challenged by the collective. And this is a classic picture. Here's one man standing in front of all those tanks, and you may have seen this. It's a famous picture. But this sums up the individual against the collective. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at some quotes about the conflict between the individual and the collective. This is Ayn Rand. She's a famous novelist. She wrote the book called Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead. And she's a bit of a, people look upon her as the epitome of capitalism. Anyway, this is what she says. Collectivism means the subjugation of the individual to a group. Whether to a race, class, or state does not matter. Collectivism holds that man must be chained to collective action and collective thought for the sake of what is called the common good. She also said this: the fight that we are in here, make no mistake about it, is a fight of individualism versus collectivism. And she wrote these quotations. She wrote these back in about 1940s, 50s, around about that time. So even back then, she was aware that there was a push for collectivism. You see, what I'm trying to show here is that sacralism is coming back. It's already back. And the the only place that has not succumbed to sacralism is America. And that is why America is in the book of Revelation, because it's in America where individuality is still treasured, but it is only treasured by the Christians. Okay? Liberty is not collective, it is personal. All liberty is individual liberty. Calvin Coolidge, an ex-American president. It has other ways of manifesting itself. This is what Ron Paul, he was an American senator. Racism is simply an ugly form of collectivism. The mindset that views humans strictly as members of groups rather than individuals. I'm sure you've heard of identity politics. This is what is sweeping through America. It's a huge problem where people, they don't identify as Americans anymore. They identify as members of a group. They see themselves as being correct and righteous, and therefore every other members of other groups have become their enemy. So being a member of a group gives a person a certain amount of security. They don't like being individuals. Being an individual can be a rather difficult experience. It's a bit like a fish swimming upstream all the time. You're always encountering opposition and problems in your life if you want to stand as an individual. Anyway, individuality is Christian. If you want to be a follower of Christ, you have to be an individual. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Christian anti-Nazi. He lost his life during the war. Just before he could be liberated, the Nazis hung him. But he wrote an interesting book called The Cost of Discipleship. And he says, through the call of Christ, men become individuals. Let's read that. Through the call of Christ, men become individuals. Willy-nilly, they are compelled to decide, and that decision can only be made by themselves. It is no choice of their own that makes them individuals. It is Christ who makes them individuals by calling them. Every man is called separately and must answer alone. But men are frightened of solitude, and they try to protect themselves by merging themselves in the society of their fellow men and the material environment. You know, everybody knows that famous verse, for God so loved the world that whosoever believeth in him, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believeth in him should not perish but have eternal life. Well, what does the word whosoever mean? Okay, what does whosoever mean? It means an individual. God does not save groups. He does not save churches. He does not save nations. He saves individuals. He calls individuals. He says, if you're not willing to forsake all and follow me, in other words, forsake your group, forsake your family, forsake your nation, and follow me, then you're not worthy to be my disciple. Jesus calls individuals. Christianity is all about individuals. Collectivism is the exact opposite of what individuals need to be. But collectivism is on the rise because sacralism is on the rise. Sacralism is all about collectivism. Everybody doing the same, thinking the same, a uniformity. This is why America is in the book of Revelation. because America is the epitome of individualism. It is where people can become Christians more readily than anywhere else, because individuality is in the American DNA. And it's in the American DNA because of its Constitution. And they have the Constitution they have because of Roger Williams. So America is in the book of Revelation because that's the last stand where God is going to place his people for the great fight which is coming. If America goes down, we all go down. And we're going to look at that when we come into the book of Revelation. So just to give you an idea of the thrust of sacralism and how it is coming back and taking over the world. This is a statement from Nicholas Berdyaev. He's a Russian philosopher. He's actually a very popular author with Vladimir Putin. Putin has said he's one of his favorite authors. Anyway, he says, I look to the thought of a world which is to begin, the world of the new Middle Ages. The new Middle Ages is coming back. And so what did we have in the Middle Ages? We had Platonism. Platonism ruled over the Middle Ages. You had the philosopher kings, not more like kings rather than philosophers, but you have the oligarchy at the top, and you have the security forces, the soldiers, etc. in the middle. A little bit of middle class because of the priests and monks who were educated, and some merchants, but the vast majority were simply serfs, which is just a notch above slavery. That's how the Middle Ages operated, and he says it's coming back. Look what he says here. We are witnessing the end of the Renaissance. Minds that were gifted with some power of intuition would readily go back to the Middle Ages to seek the real roots of human life, to find man once more. Man is tired to death and ready to rest upon any kind of collectivism that may come, and then human individuality will vanish once and for all. And he wrote this almost 100 years ago. Man has become tired. He doesn't want to be an individual anymore. He wants to be part of a collective, and then he can rest. And he can be a part of a herd, if the herd turns right, they turn right. If the herd turns left, he turns left. If it goes straight ahead, he goes straight ahead. People don't think for themselves anymore. They just follow the herd. And this is where we're going. And if it was bad 100 years ago, what do you think it is like now? You know, Trump kept saying when he was president, when he was running for president, he kept saying, America will never be a socialist nation. Well, that's yet to be seen. What happened to Trump? He's no longer around. Is the Biden administration promoting socialism? Well, I think they could be. Anyway, let's carry on. Sacralism wants to destroy America. And so what we're going to look at now is how they're doing that. We're going to look at the ideologies that are destroying America. Okay? We have socialism, we have communism, we have fascism, we have the New Age movement, and we have environmentalism. Now, don't get upset with me, because you may be an environmentalist. You may think that we need to look after the environment. Well, I do too. I think we do. We all ought to be environmentalists, but environmentalism, the modern movement of environmentalism, has very little to do with looking after the planet, and it's all about politics. And then we have political correctness and wokeism. Wokeism is simply political correctness on steroids. It's a severe case of political correctness. So now we're going to look at the organizations which are promoting the destruction of America and secularism. And we have Catholicism, we have the United Nations, we have trade unions, and we have the Club of Rome, and we have the Theosophical Society, and we have the World Economic Forum. Now those last three, maybe you don't know much about them, but we could include many others, such as the Bilderberger Group, the Trilateral Commission. There are so many of these types of organizations. The reason why I've included them here is because I'm going to mention them. So first of all, Nazism. And this is Hitler speaking. It is thus necessary that the individual should finally come to realize that his own ego is of no importance in comparison with the existence of his nation. By the way, this is fascism too. Nazism and fascism are the same thing. That the position of the individual ego is conditioned solely by the interests of the nation as a whole. That above all, the unity of a nation's spirit and will are worth far more than the freedom of the spirit and will of an individual. Plato would have loved Hitler. This state of mind, which subordinates the interests of the ego to the conservation of the community, is really the first premise for every truly human culture. Notice what he says: the subordination of the individual to the interests of the community is the first premise. It's the fundamental principle for all true human culture. Wrong. Wrong, Mr. Hitler. That is not true. That eliminates Christians. Christians are going to be in big trouble if they have a society that acts like that. Anyway, he carries on. The basic attitude from which such activity arises, we call to distinguish it from egoism and selfishism, is idealism. By this we understand only the individual's capacity to make sacrifices for the community, for his fellow man. So that's exactly what the original colonists, the Plymouth colonists, that's what they did. They sacrificed the interests of the individual for the community, and half of them died. That's fascism and Nazism. It's the same thing. It's the same principle, the same impulse. Everybody has to act the same, do the same. It's secularism and it's collectivism. So, let's carry on. This is Hitler's propaganda in chief. Yeah, they actually called it propaganda back then. That was the information service, propaganda. He was in charge of the propaganda ministry. And he says, to be a socialist is to submit the I to the thou. Socialism is sacrificing the individual to the whole. This is Vladimir Lenin. The goal of socialism is communism. But we must keep that quiet. Don't let the people understand that socialism is just the halfway house, halfway to communism. Okay? Don't tell anybody, because we're using socialism. We're using socialism to destroy America, but don't tell anybody that the goal is really communism. Please keep that quiet. Okay? The theory of communism may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property. Karl Marx. Let's see what Ayn Rand says. The essential characteristic of socialism is the denial of individual property rights. Remember, that's what saved the colony, the Plymouth Colony. That's what America copied. From then on, they rejected collectivism because half the colony died, and they went for individual property rights. So how are they doing that today? Well, look at this. Oregon man sentenced to 30 days in jail for collecting rainwater on his property. How they get around these, the insistence on private property is these socialist, communist type people, they pass these laws restricting what you can do on your property. And these laws have become so egregious, so heavy, that some people can virtually, even though they own the property, they can't really use it. They can't really do what they want to do with the property. And the laws that they use are all based on environmental issues, almost all of them. See, let me show you again this news item. You see, this is collectivism in action, because the rainwater, even though it falls on this man's property, it belongs to the whole community, and he is being selfish for collecting the rainwater, which belongs to everybody. That's the reasoning for laws like this. You understand? This is how environmentalism is used to promote collectivism and destroy America. So let's look at environmentalism. Here's a what would you call it? A slogan? No, a logo. Earth first. No compromise in the defense of Mother Earth. No compromise. Mother Earth comes first. Comes before humans. Comes before you and me. Mother Earth has the priority. And who's Mother Earth anyway? I thought it was just the Earth, but apparently she's a mother. Okay. That's Gaia, and that is paganism. So who's responsible for the politicization of environmentalism? Well, that's why I wanted to talk to you about the Club of Rome. They issued this book, The Limits to Growth, back in the 1970s, and it says it's a report for the Club of Rome's project on the predicament of mankind. So mankind is in a big predicament, and it's all about environmentalism. You may have heard of things like, global warming, climate change. You may have heard those things in the media. I'm being facetious, of course. Anyway, this is what they say. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, look at that. Oh, what unites us? An enemy. We need to be united because we're sacralists, we're collectivists. We want people to be united, all right? So we came up with the idea that pollution, threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers, of course, will be caused by human intervention that will require a global response. So you see, what they're doing is they're highlighting these problems in the environment, and they're blaming human beings for it. They're blaming it all on the activities of human beings as they develop and work the resources of the planet. It's all mankind's fault. So what do we have to do? Well, let's see. We're nearly going. We're 7 billion. It's a lot of people. Maybe we should get. Maybe we should do something about that. Anyway, I'm not going to say any more, but I might upset some people. But this is the Club of Rome, and this is what they do. They promote environmental panic, and you may have heard of a girl called Greta Thunberg and everybody else who's on that particular wagon. All right? Anyway, so what did they start with? They started with global cooling. Wow, look at that. We're all going to freeze. We're all going to die of the big freeze. How to survive the coming ice age. And the reason why they chose that is because, you see, the climate does change and it was getting cooler. So they thought, well, let's scare everybody. Let's tell them they're all going to die in a new ice age, all right? But then they changed to this. Be worried, be very worried. Worried about what? Oh, polar bears, of course, because the ice in the North Pole is melting and and we're all going to drown when the seas rise, and we're all going to fry with the sun being so hot, and all these problems. We have to do something about it. And they changed almost overnight from global cooling to global warming, and that's because they discovered that the climate had changed again. It became warmer. So let's go with warming now. And if you think Time magazine is the only one that's promoting it, no, they're all promoting it. The media is just going berserk over this terrible problem of global warming. But you know what? They have I should have showed you this, but they have another problem now. The Earth has started cooling again. Oh, dear me. What are they going to do? How can we scare the people? So anyway, let's carry on. The New Age movement. Now, the New Age movement is really bringing back the old movement. This is really paganism in practice. You see, when people reject Christianity, and that's what people are doing, and they have been doing, and to a large extent, many people have been rejecting Christianity, but they're still spiritual, and they're looking for spiritual comfort and spiritual affirmation. So they join these crazy things like the New Age movement, where anything goes, and but there's no responsibility. You see, if you believe in God, then you become responsible. You become a part of His plan, and you have to fit in with His plan. You have to do His will. But here, there's no responsibility. You can do whatever you like. You think whatever you like. Say whatever you like. Anyway, so this is the New Age movement, and this is the movement that is heavily involved in the environmental movement, and it's been totally politicized by the Club of Rome. Now, the New Age movement was basically started by the Theosophical Society. And here you have Madame Blavatsky, and she was the founder of the Theosophical Society. And here is Alice Bailey, one of her acolytes. She was one of the leaders that took over when Madame Blavatsky died. So let me show you what Alice Bailey says. She says, the fusion of many minds into one directed activity is today of supreme importance. Unity of directed thought and purpose is the guarantee of inevitable and future success. The power of mass thought is omnipotent. Yeah, the power of mass thought is omnipotent, and we must be fused together. Our minds must be fused into one directed activity. So you cannot be an individual in the New Age movement or in the Theosophical Society. You have to fuse, okay? And the new race will have, do you see that? There's a new race coming. My goodness, how interesting. This new race will have intuitive understanding and control of energy and will bring humanity to the enlightened level of the willing sacrifice of the individual to the group. Same old story, same old platonic rubbish. Moving from selfish desire into group love. Wow. This thing, of course, promoted the hippie movement and the environmental movement. All of that is part of, I'm sure you've heard of free love and which was going around in the 1960s and 70s. It's all part and parcel of the same impulse. We're returning to sacralism, where everybody will be part of a group. And this is Pierre Teilhard, and he says, whatever does not merge is evil. In other words, if you don't go in the same direction, you become evil. You are outside of the impulse that is taking the world by storm, and you have to conform. By the way, he is a Jesuit priest. And you'll notice here that the book that is published by Fordham University, and that is a Jesuit university. And when you talk to leaders of the New Age movement, and there are many, almost all of them say that they get their inspiration from this man right here, a Roman Catholic Jesuit priest. They hail him as one of the leading lights and the foundation of the New Age movement and the environmental movement. As we know, the belief that the human individual cannot perfect himself or fully exist except through the organic unification of all men in God is essential and fundamental to Christian doctrine. No, it isn't. It's Catholic doctrine, Pierre. It is not Christian doctrine. True Christians are individuals, and they do not merge. They do not join groups that are not Christian. They stand apart and alone. Unfortunately, that's what Jesus says when he says, he said, you must leave your family if they don't want to be Christian. You have to go and follow me, and anybody who gets in your way, you have to abandon. Okay? That's why I call it feel-good fascism. That's the environmental movement and the New Age movement. It's fascist, it's collectivism, and it's socialist. You got to remember that the fascists, Hitler and Mussolini, were socialists. The only difference between them and the communism that established itself in the Soviet Union was that Hitler and Mussolini were national socialists. They wanted to use socialism for the glory of their nations. The Soviet Union wanted international communism, and they fought over that difference, seriously. Anyway, let's go to the United Nations. United Nations, here is one of their leaders. He says, to achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family, tradition, national patriotism, and religious dogmas. All of that has to go. In other words, if you want to partake of programs that the United Nations is implementing around the world, you have to be aware that it is anti-Christian. It is anti-individualistic. And since we're talking about the United Nations, let's have a look at a statue which they put outside their headquarters just recently in the last few weeks. Are you ready? Here it is. They call it the Guardian of International Peace and Security. Wow, look at that. A lot of Christians are looking at that and they go, whoa, that looks like the beast from Revelation. And maybe that's why they put it there. And maybe the enemy is trying to tell us that the beast in Revelation is the United Nations. Sure looks like it, doesn't it? It's actually a gift from the Mexican government to the United Nations. Nice. So, let's talk about wokeism just briefly and political correctness. When people talk to you about political correctness, you have to ask yourself, whose politics is it and who's doing the correcting? The politics are socialism, and we correct each other. I'm sure you have said something at least once in your life, and somebody says to you, you can't say that. That's not right. You'll upset people. You see, that's what we do. We correct each other, and we only need to have that experience a couple of times, and we start correcting ourselves. That's what political correctness is all about. We refuse to actually say what we believe, say what we mean. We self-censor ourselves. That's the whole point of political correctness. Okay? Now look at this. We'll go back to this this picture of the Constitution. In the National Archives, there is the Constitution, and the National Archives has placed a harmful language alert on page hosting US Constitution. There it is. You can see it in the red circle. And that's a direct result of wokeism. Wokeism is all about tearing down everything, both physically and spiritually, that makes America the country that it is. They tear down statues, they tear down people, they attack anybody who, on social media, who advocates that America is a great country and that the things in America are worth protecting. No, they want to destroy everything. And that's why these silly people at the National Archive have put a warning on the Constitution. Because if you read the Constitution, you might get upset. You might not agree with it. You might harm yourself if you read the US Constitution. This is how nutty this has become. And it doesn't harbour well for the future. And the book of Revelation actually will tell us what's going to happen. So we're going to concentrate on America a little bit when we're going to find out how it appears in the book of Revelation and why it's there. We'll do that soon. But first we have to finish what we're doing here. And we're finished soon. So the institution that is going to be the most formidable and the most effective in the destruction of America is the Roman Catholic Church. And in the Catholic Church, we find anti-Christian doctrines. This is an international meeting that this is a slogan or a placard from an international meeting that Pope Francis recently had, the International Meeting of Prayer for Peace. And it says, no one is saved alone. You look at that. What have we been talking about? We've been talking about how Christ makes individuals. He calls individuals. To be a true disciple of Christ, you have to be an individual. You have to eliminate everything around you that does not conform to the will of God. But the Catholic Church takes the absolute opposite stance. And it's no more obvious than in this meeting that the Pope recently had, where he says no one is saved alone. In other words, you have to collectivize. You have to belong to a group. You cannot be saved unless you are in a group. You cannot be saved unless you are in the Catholic Church. That's what he's saying. And this is what he says. No one is saved alone as an isolated individual, but God attracts us looking at the complex web of relationships that take place in the human community. God enters into this dynamic, this participation in the web of human relationships. Yeah, you have to join a web of human relationships in order to be saved. That's Catholicism. And he goes on to say, all Christians should be of an ecumenical mind. In other words, all thinking the same. When you go to an ecumenical meeting, they say, you Adventists, you leave your Sabbath at the door. You Baptists, you leave your adult baptism at the door. When you come in here, we are only going to talk about and accept all the things that we hold in common. Okay, that's ecumenicalism. Okay, but especially those entrusted with particular duties and responsibilities in the world and in society. Hence, the principles of ecumenicism sanctioned by the Second Vatican Council should be appropriately introduced to all institutions of advanced learning. Oh, it has to take over all the universities. The ecumenical mind is the same as collectivism, which is the same as socialism. Okay? By the way, the Catholic Church has a social doctrine, and it is socialism. So they are promoting socialism and collectivism, and ecumenicalism, which is bringing all the churches back together to think the same and do the same. So, and one of the slogans that the Catholic Church and especially the popes use all the time is the common good. Whenever you see this phrase, the common good, you know that you're being confronted with Catholic propaganda. The promotion of justice through efforts to bring about openness of mind and will to the demands of the common good is something which concerns the Church deeply. Yes, it does. Because the common good is all about collectivism and it's all about socialism. Now, this is amazing. This is before Pope Benedict became the Pope, when he was just Ratzinger. And he was asked about liberation theology. And when asked about liberation theology, Ratzinger said, the absolute good, which is the same as the common good, and this means building a socialist society. By the way, those parentheses are his, not mine. So the absolute good, the common good, and this means building a just socialist society, justifies everything else, including, if necessary, violence, homicide, mendacity. Mendacity means deception, lies, delusions. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, did he really say that? Did he really say that building the common good socialist paradise, if necessary, demands violence, homicide, and lies and deception? Did he really say that? Well, yes, he did. Let me show you the quotation. It's taken from the US News and Report, December 2nd, 1985. And we're going to look at this little paragraph, and there it is. That's the quotation that we just read. So this is Catholic. By the way, when Ratzinger said that, he was in charge of correct Catholicism doctrine. Yeah, that was his office. And so here he is stating the official Catholic position. And so the common good, the Catholic common good, will save the planet. I'm sure you understand, you know, that the Catholic Church is heavily involved in the environmental movement. They promote the necessary. They go to the United Nations all the time and talk about, climate change and the necessity for mankind to fall into line with the official narrative. So, if the representatives of the states can set aside partisan and ideological interests and sincerely strive to serve the common good, I pray to Almighty God that this will be the case, and I assure you of my support and my prayers, and the support and prayers of all the faithful of the Catholic Church, that this institution, he's talking to the United Nations, all its member states, and each of its officials will always render an effective service to mankind, a service respectful of diversity and capable of bringing out, for the sake of the common good, the best in each people and in every individual. Okay, so here we have the Pope back in December last year, actually on Christmas Day, December last year, he warned against the virus of radical individualism. And I think we know that back then, this is the beginning of the corona panic, and he is telling it, there was a virus loose, and he is saying, there's a virus loose, all right, and it's radical individualism, and we have to deal with that, we have to get rid of it. He said the same thing again, basically in May 12th of this year, Pope Francis on the pandemic and the virus of individualism. He's equating individualism with the COVID pandemic. We have a pandemic of individualism as well, and we have to get rid of that. Just like we have to get rid of COVID. And here again, Pope Francis warned society against reverting to individualism after the pandemic. And that was on June of this year. So you see, this is something which is emphasized in the Catholic Church, and especially by the popes, because they know that true Christians are individuals, and they want to force us all into a collective mindset. First, accept that collectivism is a good thing, and then physically get us all collectivized. And what are they going to use? Well, look at this. Felt she on vax mandates. There comes a time when you have to give up what you consider your individual right of making your own decision. So, one of the offshoots of this whole scenario that we're living through at the moment, the pandemic crisis, it's going to assist in the destruction of individualism, and it's going to assist in the destruction of the nation that upholds individualism, and that is America. And here you have an American who knows fully well what he's doing. Dr. Fauci is almost certainly a Jesuit. He has had a Jesuit education, and from what he's been doing, I would suggest to you that he's almost certainly a Jesuit. I don't know for sure, but there are many Jesuits in the world who are not priests. They are disguised. They work undercover, but they also work as officials in official positions, and they are not well recognized for what they really are. Let me put it that way. Okay? So, just like Plato said that people should be put to death if they don't conform, the Catholic Church has the right and duty to kill heretics, because it is by fire and sword that heresy can be extirpated. For the highest good of the Church is the unity of the faith. So there you go. This is pure sacralism. This is pure Platonism. And this cannot be preserved unless heretics are put to death. And that was an opinion by a Jesuit professor of canon law back in 1901. So that's not very far away. Jesus said, "The time will come that whosoever kills you will think that he is doing God's will." And that has happened excessively and extensively in the past, and it's going to happen again. Revelation. "And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed." That, that's part of the scripture which is talking about America, I'm sad to say. But we will look into this in the future, because I have to. I'm letting some cats out of the bag here, but I'm sure most of you know that America will be taken down, and it will be taken over by the Catholic Church. So, but we need to look into this background first. Otherwise, I think it's difficult for people to understand. But we will look into this in much more detail, much more detail in the not too distant future. And I want to just emphasize one last thing. It was sacralism which killed Christ. This is Caiaphas speaking, the high priest. "Nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not." Jesus was an individual supremo. He was someone who never conformed to anybody's collectivist ideas. He said, I've come to do the will of my Father, and that's what I'm going to do. Everything else can get out of the way. But notice what it says, that he died for the nation. That's what they supposedly were trying to accomplish. They were trying to save the nation by killing Christ. They thought that if Jesus lived, he would provoke the wrath of the Romans, and the Romans would come and demolish their country, demolish their nation. The same thing is going to happen in the future. All the individuals who will not collectivize, who will not compromise with sacralism, who will refuse to be corralled into groups, all these people will have to be sacrificed for the good of the nation. All those people, most of them, will be Christians. They will not conform to what is coming. They will not cooperate with the powers that be. And because they are not willing to give up their faith and give in to the pressure, it will ultimately result in laws which will insist that these people be put to death. That's where we're going, and that's what the book of Revelation tells us. So what do we glean from this? Well, firstly, if you are a Christian, you need to stay a Christian. You need to get more serious with your Christianity. You need to come closer to Christ. You need to be willing to do everything that you understand to be true. If you understand things that, for example, keep the Sabbath day, if you understand that, then we need to keep it. There are many things that other Christians don't understand. But if you are not a Christian, then you need to become a Christian. Because, you see, the Christians are going to lose many, many battles in the not too distant future. But in a war, you can lose many battles as long as you win the last battle. Because that's where we're heading. We're going to lose many battles with the authorities, but we're going to win the last one. We're going to win the last battle. And that's in the book of Revelation too. So hold on to your faith. Hold on to Christ. And I'll see you again in the book of Revelation. And we will unravel the book of Revelation some more. So in the meantime, God bless you and keep you. And don't allow the enemy into your life. Keep yourself close to Christ. So God bless. I'll see you soon. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.